I want to tell you something I am not proud of. For most of my adult life, I did not understand my sister's pain. Not because I lacked the information. She told me many times, in many ways. Not because I didn't care about her. I did, genuinely, in the way that you care about family. But because I had constructed an understanding of myself as someone who managed things, who moved through difficulty efficiently, who did not get stuck the way other people got stuck. And that understanding of myself made it impossible to fully receive what my sister was telling me. Because if she was struggling with things that were, from my perspective, manageable, then either she was not trying hard enough, or she was making choices that were keeping her stuck, or she simply had a lower threshold for difficulty than most people. All of which I believed, at different times, about my sister Lily. None of which was true. I know that now. I know it with the specific, indelible certainty of someone who has lived through the thing they once dismissed. My name is Marcus. I am 39 years old. I have a sister named Lily who is 36 and who has spent the better part of a decade fighting a battle that I failed to recognize as a battle because it did not look, from the outside, like the kind I would have fought. And then I fought my own version of it. And I understood. Finally. Completely. At considerable personal cost. This is the story of what I failed to see for 30 years. And of the year that showed it to me. And of the conversation with my sister that followed. The hardest and the most necessary conversation of my life. I grew up being good at things. Not everything. I was not exceptional at most things in the way that produces awards and recognition. But I was competent across a wide range of the practical requirements of life in a way that made those requirements feel, to me, generally manageable. School was hard and I worked and the working produced results. Problems were difficult and I approached them and the approaching produced solutions. Relationships were complicated and I navigated and the navigating generally produced workable outcomes. I had internalized, by the time I was in my mid-20s, a model of myself as someone who figured things out. Not through genius. I knew I was not exceptional in any transcendent sense. But through the application of effort and patience and the refusal to treat difficulty as a reason to stop. This model served me well for a long time. It also made me, without my fully realizing it, a poor witness to other people's difficulty. Because the model said, difficulty is manageable if you approach it correctly, which meant that people who were not managing their difficulty were, by implication, approaching it incorrectly, which meant that the path to their managing it was for them to approach it differently, which meant that what they needed from me was not understanding, it was, at best, practical guidance about what a different approach might look like. This was the framework through which I watched my sister struggle for 30 years. Lily has depression. Not the colloquial kind. Not the sadness that all of us feel at various points, and that is real and valid, but that the world has perhaps overpathologized. The clinical kind. The kind that has a physiological basis and that responds to treatment, and that, without treatment, can be genuinely debilitating in ways that look, from the outside, like a series of baffling choices. She was diagnosed at 22. She had been living with the symptoms, without the diagnosis, for years before that. I knew about the diagnosis. My family knew. We were supportive in the broad, well-meaning way of families who do not have the specific education to understand what they are being supportive of. But I did not understand what depression actually meant in daily life. What it meant to wake up every morning with the particular weight of it. What it cost her to perform the ordinary functions of the day that cost me nothing. What it felt like to be told, by your own brain, the same convincing lies about your worth and your capability and your future, over and over, with the relentlessness of something that has unlimited ammunition. I did not understand any of this. And so I watched her cancel plans and I thought, she needs to push through. I watched her not apply for jobs she was qualified for and I thought, she is limiting herself unnecessarily. I watched her struggle with relationships and I thought, she is choosing difficult patterns she could choose to change. I said some of this to her. Not cruelly. I was not cruel, and I want to be clear about that because I think cruelty is easier to identify and easier to account for than what I actually did. I said it helpfully, in the voice of someone who believes they are seeing clearly and who wants to share the clarity. She received it the way you receive a message that tells you your pain is a choice, I did not understand that was what I was saying. Not until the year everything broke. I was 37 years old when the wall appeared. I do not know how else to describe it. Not a single dramatic event, though there were dramatic events within the year. More an accumulation. A series of stresses that arrived in close enough proximity that they could not be processed sequentially and that therefore piled up into something larger than the sum of their parts. The job I had been building toward for 5 years fell apart in a corporate restructuring that had nothing to do with my performance and everything to do with forces entirely outside my control. My marriage, which had been under strain for longer than I had acknowledged, reached a point of crisis in the same 6 months. My father was diagnosed with a health condition that required significant attention and that reorganized the family's energy and my own. Any one of these would have been hard. Together, they were more than my usual approach. Figure it out, work harder, keep moving, had the tools to manage. And I discovered, with a shock that I am still slightly embarrassed to admit was as complete as it was, that I could not figure it out. Not because I was not applying effort. I applied enormous effort. But there are things that effort does not reach, states of being that are not the product of insufficient trying and that therefore cannot be resolved by trying harder. And when you have spent your whole life believing that trying harder is the answer, discovering that it is not is a particular kind of destabilizing. I could not sleep. Not consistently. I could fall asleep and I would wake at 3 or 4 in the morning with an anxiety that had no specific object, a generalized terrible feeling of wrongness that sat in my chest like something physical. I could not concentrate in the way I was used to concentrating. I would sit at my desk with something that needed doing and find that the gap between knowing it needed doing and being able to do it was unbridgeable in a way it had never been before. I withdrew from the people around me. Not dramatically. I still showed up. Still functioned at the minimum required level. But I withdrew in the interior sense, the way you withdraw when being fully present requires a resource you do not currently have. And one evening, sitting alone in my apartment at 10 o'clock at night, unable to do the thing I had been trying to do since 6, unable to sleep, unable to call anyone and explain what was happening because I did not have the words for it, I had a thought. The thought was, this is what Lily has been describing. Not exactly, not identically. Her experience is hers and mine is mine, and the particular texture of depression and anxiety is different for every person who lives with it. But structurally, the inability to bridge the gap between knowing and doing, the weight that has no specific object, the withdrawal that is not a choice but a necessity. This is what Lily has been describing. For years, while I was telling her she needed to approach things differently, I sat with that for a very long time. And what arrived, alongside the shame of it, the specific, acute shame of understanding what you have failed to understand and grasping the full cost of that failure, was something else. Compassion. For her. Retroactive, inadequate, genuinely felt compassion for everything I had not seen. I got help. I want to say that plainly because I think it is important to say plainly. I sought professional help. A therapist, and eventually a psychiatrist who prescribed medication that addressed something in the chemistry of what I was experiencing. Both were necessary. The therapy gave me the tools and the space to understand what was happening. The medication addressed what the tools could not reach on their own. I tell you this not to make a point about seeking help, though I believe that point is worth making, but because what happened in therapy was directly relevant to my understanding of Lily. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Walsh, who had a quality of warm directness that I found both challenging and essential, helped me do something I had never done before. She helped me sit with something without immediately trying to solve it. This sounds simple. It was, for me, one of the most difficult things I had ever done. I had spent 37 years treating every internal state as a problem to be solved, an experience to be processed efficiently and moved past. The result was that I had an enormous amount of practical capability and a very limited capacity for genuine empathy, because empathy requires the ability to sit with someone else's experience without immediately reaching for the solution. You cannot understand someone's pain from inside the solving of it. You can only understand it from inside the sitting with it. Dr. Walsh helped me understand this not as a concept. I could have understood it as a concept without ever changing, but as an experience. By making me practice it. By creating, in the therapy room, the conditions in which I had to stay with things rather than manage them. And in that practice, I began to understand Lily. Not just intellectually. I had the intellectual version for years, the Wikipedia version of depression that I had read and filed and used to generate my well-meaning advice. But viscerally, from inside my own version of a similar experience, from inside the knowledge of what it feels like to have the gap between knowing and doing be genuinely unbridgeable by will alone. I called her in month 4 of my therapy, not to tell her what I had been going through. That came later. But to ask her something. I said, Lily, can I ask you about what it's actually like for you? Not so I can help. Just, I want to understand. There was a long pause, and she said, You've never asked me that before. We talked for 3 hours. Lily told me things she had never told me before. Not because she had been keeping them from me. She had tried to tell me versions of them over the years. But because in the previous versions of our conversations, she had been met with advice, with reframes, with the well-intentioned but ultimately dismissive response of someone who was hearing her words but was not receiving her experience. This time I just listened. She told me about the mornings, about the specific quality of waking up that she described as stepping directly into a weight, not a weight on her body but inside it, inside her chest and her head, a heaviness that had no cause she could point to and that therefore felt like the truth about the world rather than a symptom of something treatable. The way that heaviness colored everything that followed. The way it made ordinary tasks feel like Herculean efforts while looking, from the outside, completely reasonable and accomplishable. She told me about the things people had said to her over the years. Well-meaning people. People who loved her. Things like, have you tried exercise? Have you tried eating better? Have you tried just deciding to be positive? Things that implied that the problem was one of insufficient trying rather than a condition that existed independently of her effort. She told me what those things felt like to receive. And then she paused. And she said, You used to say things like that to me. I said, I know. She said, They made me feel worse. Not because you were trying to hurt me, but because they told me you thought I wasn't trying. And I was trying so hard. So hard, Marcus, every single day. I held the phone for a moment, and I said, I know that now. I didn't know it then. And I am sorry. Not the quick kind of sorry, the kind that means I actually understand what I did. Because I think I do, now. And I am genuinely, deeply sorry. Another pause, and she said, What happened? What changed? And I told her. I told her about the year. About the war, about the 3 a.m. mornings and the inability to bridge the gap and the withdrawal that was not a choice, about the therapist and the medication and the specific moment when I had been sitting alone in my apartment at 10 o'clock at night and had thought, this is what Lily has been describing. I told her that I had been wrong. For 30 years. Not cruelly, not deliberately, but consequentially. I had been wrong about what she was going through and wrong about what she needed and wrong about what my role was in her experience of it. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. And then she said something that I want to share with you because it is the truest thing anyone has ever said to me about empathy. She said, You couldn't have understood it until you lived something like it. That's not an excuse. You could have listened better. You could have believed me more. You could have not given me advice when I was asking for witness. But the full understanding, the kind you have now, that does require living it. I don't blame you for not having it before. I just needed you to have it eventually. I had gotten there eventually. It had cost both of us more than it should have. My relationship with Lily is different now. Not fixed in the sense of restored to a previous state. It was not that simple, and pretending otherwise would not honor what she went through in the years when I was failing to see her. But different in a way that is better and more honest and more genuinely useful to her than anything I offered before. I call her more. Not to check in, not to do the functional monitoring that passes for support in families that have not learned better. I call to ask how things actually are. And I wait for the actual answer. And when the actual answer is hard, I sit with the hard thing rather than reaching immediately for what might help. She has told me this is the most useful thing I have ever done for her. Not the practical help, though I offer that too, but the sitting with it, the witnessing without the advising, The presence that does not require her experience to be something other than what it is. I have also changed how I am with other people. Not dramatically, I did not become a different person. But I have a quality of attention now that I did not have before. A capacity to sit with other people's difficulty without immediately looking for where the incorrect approach is. A willingness to believe people about their experience even when the experience looks manageable from the outside. Because I know now what I did not know before. The inside of something is never the same as the outside of it. And the people who are struggling with things that look manageable from the outside are not, in general, unless there is specific evidence to the contrary, struggling because they are approaching things incorrectly. They are struggling because the thing is genuinely hard. And the genuinely hard thing deserves witness rather than advice. I am a better brother now than I was for 30 years. I am not proud that it took me this long. But I am glad I got here. And Lily, when I told her I was glad I finally understood, when I said that going through the hard year had given me something I would not trade because it had given me the understanding of her, she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, I'm glad too, even though it cost you. And I said, it should have cost me more. It cost you more. For 30 years. She said, yeah, it did. And we sat with that truth, both of us, together, for the first time. The karma in this story is the hard year. Not as punishment for my failure to understand Lily. I do not believe that the universe arranged my professional and marital and familial difficulties as a corrective lesson about empathy. That would be too tidy and too convenient and too comfortable, making my suffering the center of a story that should center her. But the hard year was, in its effect, the thing that produced what nothing else had been able to produce. Understanding. The kind that cannot be arrived at from the outside. That cannot be reasoned into or explained into or argued into. That can only arrive through experience, through the specific, visceral, inescapable experience of being inside the thing you have been observing from outside. Karma is not always punishment. It is also, and I think this is its more important operation, correction. The arrival of what is needed to produce change that was not happening through any other means. I needed to understand Lily's pain. And I was not going to understand it by being told about it. And so I was given a year inside something adjacent enough to teach me. The lesson was expensive, but I would not give it back. Lily and I have brunch every month now. Just the two of us, the way we never did before the year that broke me and rebuilt me into someone capable of being the brother she deserved. Last month she said something at the end of brunch that I want to share. She said, I used to dread talking to you about how I was doing. I knew I'd come away feeling worse. Now you're the person I most want to talk to when things are hard. That's a big change, Marcus. I said, I know. She said, I'm glad you finally got it. I said, me too. I'm sorry it took so long. She smiled, and she said, you're here now. You're here now. 3 words that meant everything. Because they were true. I want to say something to the people who are being failed right now. The ones who are in pain, real, genuine, physiological or psychological or situational or all 3 simultaneously, and who are surrounded by people who love them and who are not seeing it. Who are being given advice when they need witness. Who are being told to try harder when they are already trying as hard as they are capable of trying. I see you now. Not perfectly. I am not claiming that understanding the shape of something means I can fully understand your specific version of it. But I see you in a way I did not see my sister for 30 years. And I want you to know that the people who are not seeing you are not, in most cases, failing you from cruelty. They are failing you from the inside of a belief that they are exempt, that they would manage it differently, that the gap between knowing and doing is always bridgeable by sufficient effort. That belief is wrong. And some of them, not all, not predictably, but some, will discover it is wrong when their own wall appears. And when they do, they may finally understand you. Hold on for that moment if you can. And I want to say something to the ones who are failing someone right now, who have a person in their life who is struggling with something that looks, from the outside, manageable, who are giving advice when what is needed is witness. Stop giving advice. Just for a moment. Ask them what it is actually like. And then be quiet. And let the answer arrive. and receive it without immediately locating where the incorrect approach is. You do not have to understand it fully to see it. You just have to be willing to look. Before the year that breaks you makes you. This has been Soul Tales. My name is Marcus. Every month, I have brunch with my sister Lily. She orders the same thing every time. I have stopped giving her advice about her order. It took me long enough, but I'm here now.